Radium Girls. As World War I broke out, hundreds of young, middle-class women started looking for jobs to help their families. Some were hired as ammunition testers, switchboard operators, or even airplane factory seamstresses, putting their needlework knowledge to good use. However, the most coveted position was that of watch painting. Considered an elite job, it paid over 3 times the average factory position, giving hundreds of young adults the chance to be financially independent. Women, especially teenagers, were perfect for the job, as they had small, steady hands. As part of the job, the employees painted watches and military dials with radium, an element that had only been discovered 20 years earlier. Because most of the device's screen size was merely 1 inch wide, the ladies had to use a technique called lip pointing, in which they'd slip a paintbrush between their lips to draw the small numbers. The women raised the brushes to their mouths about 200 times per day, and each time, they swallowed a bit of green paint. The factory's owners had told them that radium was a harmless substance, so the women did not mind ingesting the paint. In addition, because of the element's natural luminosity, they became enchanted with its glow, and even used radium to paint their teeth, fingernails, and face to woo potential suitors. Throughout the 1920s, radium was marketed as a health supplement, and water, cosmetics, and toothbrushes were infused with the substance and sold all over the world. However, this luminous element had a dark side that would quickly come to light. The first body part to suffer the effects were the teeth, as more and more of the ladies suffered from loose molars, lesions, and ulcers. Then came the anemia, which caused them to suddenly break their extremities. And many of the women also suffered from jaw infections, lack of menstruation, and sterility. The factory owners constantly denied that radium was the reason behind the women's illnesses and merely sent the women to the hospital, where the X-ray machines only worsened their health by subjecting them to additional radiation. In 1922, Molly Maggia was the first paint watcher to lose her life, and the factory owners gave her family a false diagnosis to try to cover the real reason. Many more women followed, and by 1927, over 50 young women had passed away, while hundreds more suffered from painful illnesses and permanent injuries. That same year, 5 former painters filed a legal lawsuit against the United States Radium Corporation with the help of Catherine Donahue and attorney Leonard Grossman. Dr. Harrison Martland was chosen to perform an autopsy on one of the deceased and concluded that radium was present in the woman's bones. In October of 1939, after 8 appeals, the so-called Radium Girls finally earned their victory. The women's ceaseless fight led to the introduction of new safety standards for factory workers, and radium was removed from every product. Marie Curie. Marie Curie revolutionized science and discovered radioactivity, but it was at the cost of her own life. Marie Salomea Sklodowska was born on November 7, 1867 in Warsaw, Poland. While growing up, higher education wasn't available for Polish women, so Marie worked as a tutor. In 1891, 24-year-old Sklodowska moved to Paris to study chemistry, mathematics, and physics at the Sorbonne Institute, finishing her master's degree 3 years later. Soon after, with plenty of industrial funding, she began work on her PhD in physics, studying steel's composition and magnetic properties. In 1895, she married French professor, scientist, and magnetism expert Pierre Curie. That same year, Marie began studying uranium rays and eventually hypothesized that more chemical elements were still waiting to be discovered. The newlyweds soon began working together in a dilapidated laboratory, tirelessly stirring old cauldrons filled with substances for their research. The Curie's findings were impressive, including the discovery of 2 new chemical elements. The first was polonium, which was 300 times more radioactive than uranium, and the second was radium, millions of times more radioactive. The spouses also found out that the radium compounds were luminous, making them a potential heat source capable of continual heat without the need for a chemical reaction. Marie and Pierre coined the term radioactivity to describe this characteristic. In 1903, Marie Curie broke gender barriers when she became the first woman to win the Nobel Prize, accepting the prize in physics for her discoveries. Unfortunately, the couple had no idea of the dangers of radiation exposure. Marveled by the element's luminescence, Mr. Curie even carried a radium sample in his pocket to show his loved ones, while Marie put it next to her bed to use as a nightlight. In 1934, 66-year-old Marie Curie succumbed to aplastic anemia, a condition in which the bone marrow ceases to produce new blood cells. Curie's laboratory artifacts, including precious notebooks, are still radioactive almost 100 years after her passing, and will likely remain so for at least 1,500 more years. Any scientist who wishes to view the notebooks has to sign a waiver and wear protective gear. Aben Byers. Born in 1880, Aben Byers was an upper-class socialite who became a minor celebrity when he became an amateur golf champion. In 1927, Byers injured his arm after falling from a railway sleeping cot. While visiting his doctor, the physician prescribed him a tonic called Radithor to ease the pain and improve his overall health. Also known as radium water, each of the tonic's bottles contained triple distilled water mixed with 1 microgram of radium and other substances. The liquid was consumed before every meal. The medicine was patented and manufactured by William J. A. Bailey, a Harvard University dropout and fake doctor who claimed that radium water stimulated the endocrine system. Bailey became rich by selling the radiation-infused liquid and offered physicians a 16% kickback per prescribed dose. Over the next 2 years, Byers became dependent on the water. At first, he felt better after consuming it, but not long after, he began losing weight and suffering from severe headaches. Things took a turn for the worst when his jaw became necrotic and he lost all his teeth. After ingesting approximately 14,000 bottles of Radithor, Byers perished from his wounds in March of 1932 at the age of 51. He had to be buried in a lead-lined coffin. Although William J. A. Bailey's medicine was the subject of a thorough investigation for false and misleading advertising after Byers' death, he was never convicted. Andrei K Dugan Jr. After the radium poisoning incident in the 1920s, the effects of radiation exposure were more clearly understood and taken seriously by the scientific community. In addition, nuclear energy for military use was in the initial stages of research, and sickness by radiation was a rare occurrence. On August 21, 1945, Manhattan Project physicist and researcher Andrei K Dugan conducted a solo experiment at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. The experiment consisted of building a neutron reflector for a large, round sphere made of plutonium. Because the round object was the exposed core of a nuclear weapon, the device would help it produce an atomic reaction using stacked bricks made of tungsten carbide. Although the sphere was stable and dozens of scientists kept their eyes on it, as more neutrons were reflected back by the device, the object came closer and closer to criticality, a point at which a sustainable nuclear reaction begins. As Dugan continued to layer the bricks one by one, his monitoring equipment notified him that the core was about to hit criticality. He then attempted to remove a brick, but it fell on top of the sphere, turning it supercritical and exposing the scientist to massive amounts of ionizing radiation. As a result of the accident, Dugan fell into a coma and perished 25 days later. 1 year later, Louis Slutton, another Manhattan Project physicist, dropped the core while conducting a similar experiment. The sphere burst into radioactivity and expelled a bright blue flash of light. Although Slutton was initially fine after the incident, he eventually fell into a coma as well and died 9 days later of radiation exposure. After these tragic incidents, the spherical metallic core became known as the Demon Core amongst the scientific community. Alexander Litvinenko. Alexander Litvinenko was a former officer of both the Russian Federal Security Service and the Soviet KGB, the Committee for State Security. After speaking out against corruption inside the Russian government, he fled to the United Kingdom and asked for political asylum, continuing to be a vocal critic of the Russian state. In 2006, Litvinenko became unexplainably ill and suddenly perished 3 weeks later. An autopsy revealed that his afternoon tea contained a lethal dose of plutonium-210, a plutonium isotope used as a poison. Moments before his passing, the agent accused Vladimir Putin of masterminding the attack. In the largest espionage conflict since the Cold War, the British investigation surrounding the refugee's death led to a strained relationship between the two countries. The English authorities blamed the murder on Andrei K Lugovoi, a former KGB agent who remains in Russia as a member of parliament. Meanwhile, Lugovoi accused British secret intelligence agency MI6 and a Russian tycoon, Boris Berezovsky, of organizing the radiation poisoning. On a public hearing almost a decade later, a Metropolitan Police representative stated that, quote, "The evidence suggests that the only credible explanation is, in one way or another, the Russian state is involved in Litvinenko's murder." Litvinenko's passing remains a mystery to this day, as Russia refuses to extradite Lugovoi and no charges have been filed. Thank you for watching our Dark 5 video. Let us know if you'd like us to tackle a topic of your interest. And don't forget to subscribe to all our channels and hit the bell icon to get notified of our newest content.